This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. So one of my favorites arrived the other day. That would be the email that comes in first offering praise and then the colonoscopy that comes after. You know these types. They tell you how much they love you and then they write a page about how much they hate you. But this is the cost of doing business. I love this. I love the debate. I love getting in and trying to figure out where the truth might lie. So this guy told me how much he loved my podcast, but then proceeded to rip me in a multitude of ways. But he did say one thing in this very long email that caught my eye. Something that I think we can all learn from. Quote, blank, and I'm leaving the name out because you can all figure out who the name is and it's not really relevant. Fill in the blank for famous hedge fund manager. Blank is very successful and he does identify as being somebody who looks to buy into trends, and I take him at his word with that. But trend following systems are a broad church. Most trading systems are looking to follow a trend in some way, shape, or form. I have no idea what specifically this trader does to identify trades. And I'm sure you don't either. But he does employ 400 people, many of whom would have PhDs in maths or physics, etc., and he uses supercomputers in his efforts to identify trades, end quote. Well, man, I'm screwed. We're all screwed. Because there's some one guy managing billions upon billions upon billions of money. This one guy, this one trend-following trader who has a staff of 400 people, and he's got supercomputers. What the is a supercomputer? Don't you just know that the argument is when someone comes up with a word like that? Supercomputer. What the hell is a supercomputer? Some namby-pamby, mean-nothing expression. I should calm down. Look, this guy, he's not sure how it all works. He wants to know, but he doesn't. He's a little right and a little wrong. And boy, is that dangerous for him. Let me address a few quick points, and then I want to get into the main thrust of this episode. Trend following systems are a broad church. That means nothing. What I did with my trend following book, one of the reasons that it became so popular is because I went through and provided, in a way that was not normally accessible to people, trend following track records. Trend following track records from traders that had no connection to each other. And the average person could go through those track records, perform a statistical analysis, look at the correlation of returns, go look up to find out what markets were moving when they had those returns in whatever particular month. And to show that data gave people an idea of what trend following was all about and that it was not a broad church. That is the only reason my trend following book sold over 100,000 copies, is because it took away such wrong statements. Oh, sure, people can carve up the trends in any old fashion they like. They can use multiple entries. They can use multiple exits. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they have one entry and one exit. Perhaps they trade a $100,000 account. Perhaps they trade a $30 billion account. But what in the world does the size of the account have to do with trend following? What does the size of the account have to do with long-term trend following? Oh, sure, you can't be a long-term trend follower with $100 in the bank. We all get that. You have to have some capital to play the game. No doubt. No one is disagreeing. No one is fighting that point. But when you see statements from an individual who wants to understand trend following, doesn't really understand it, and is pointing out that a particular hedge fund manager has 400 employees and supercomputers to identify trades. There, in that simple statement, is so much confusion. And I will guarantee you, this individual that wrote me today, his confusion doesn't just start with trend following. His confusion doesn't start with the style of trend following. His confusion is not just the 400 employees. His confusion is he doesn't know what the f*** a computer is. Let me say a few things about this particular hedge fund manager. I respect him a lot. He's given me a lot of his time over the years. His writings are brilliant. He started his fund in 1997 with $5 million under management and has grown it to $30 billion. He's a trend following trader. He's a big trend following trader. All of those employees, guess what? They're not all needed for the day-to-day understanding of or execution of the particular trend following methods that they employ over the vast amount of their capital. I ask you to go with me for a second to try and take your imagination to a place where you can imagine what it's like to manage $30 billion in assets. There are CPAs involved. There are attorneys involved. There is massive amounts of data involved. Logistically, this is a big operation. This is not just a one-man trader, even though the technique itself might be very closely aligned with that single trader. When you're running a $30 billion hedge fund, that's a Fortune 100 business. That's serious effort. You have investors that demand certain things. But put that aside for a moment. That's not the conversation. That's not the debate. Those things are distractions to understanding strategy. The strategy we want to understand is trend following. Always stay focused, logically focused. If I read this guy's full email that he sent me, it's like a page-long diatribe of logical fallacies. But let me keep working forward because I really want to get to the crux of what stimulated my thinking today from this particular email. And it's that word supercomputer. It's the word computer. Now, this particular hedge fund manager mentioned in this excerpt from this reader email that was sent to me, this particular hedge fund manager is on record saying that his trading is executed through Excel spreadsheets. Spreadsheets. Let that sink in for a moment. Where is the supercomputer in an Excel spreadsheet? I don't know how an Excel spreadsheet is a supercomputer. We all have Excel. We all have differing levels of understanding of how to use Excel or how to code Excel. But we all know what the hell a spreadsheet is. Input, output. It's very straightforward. So today, I thought I would take a deep dive on the phrase computer, on the phrase algorithm, to break it apart in a philosophical sense. And I'm going to reach out to somebody who I would love to have on my podcast at some point in time in the future, a philosopher named Dan Dennett. I'm going to read an excerpt from his fantastic book titled Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. If you've not read this book, if you've not read anything from Dan Dennett, I highly recommend right now just going out and buying it. If you can't read Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking and be inspired in your own life for improvement and clarity and to see the world in just a much more enlightened way, you're already gone, man. Just go get the Social Security and the buy and hold and turn the computer off and watch CNN and get your ass scared every day. But for those of you that are still with me, let me read an excerpt from Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking. It goes directly to that phrase, computer, that thinking of an algorithm. Computers have powers that in earlier centuries would have seemed miraculous, real magic. But although many computer programs are dauntingly complicated, all of them are composed of steps that are completely explainable in very simple terms. There is no room for mysteries in what computers do. That very fact is part of the value of computers as thinking tools. And explaining, in outline, how this works is philosophically interesting in its own right. How computers do their magic is well worth understanding at an elementary level. Now, Dennett in his book actually walks you through the very basics of a very simple computer program. And even if you never took computer programming, just to read his few pages, the idea of what a computer does, how software operates, how an operating system operates, how it all connects together. Well, it gets back to my dear reader who has no clue what he's talking about and is basically scared of computers because he doesn't know what the hell one is. Continuing with Dan Dennett. Algorithms are not new, and they were not new in Darwin's day. Many familiar arithmetic procedures, such as performing long division and balancing your checkbook, are algorithms, and so are the decision procedures for playing perfect tic-tac-toe and for putting a list of words into alphabetical order. What is relatively new and permits us valuable hindsight on Darwin's discovery is the theoretical reflection by mathematicians and logicians on the nature and power of algorithms in general, a 20th century development that led to the birth of the computer, which in turn has led to a much deeper and more lively understanding of the powers of algorithms in general. The term algorithm descends via Latin to early English from the name of a Persian mathematician, whose books on arithmetical procedures written in the 9th century was translated into Latin in the 11th century. The idea that an algorithm is a foolproof and somehow mechanical procedure has been present for centuries, but it was the pioneering work of Alan Turing, Kurt Gödel, and Alonzo Church in the 1930s that more or less fixed our current understanding of the term. 3 key features of algorithms will be important to us, and each is somewhat difficult to define. Number 1, substrate neutrality. The procedure for long division works equally well with pencil or pen, paper or parchment, neon lights or skywriting, using any symbol system you like. The power of the procedure is due to its logical structure, not the casual powers of the materials used, just so long as those casual powers permit the prescribed steps to be followed exactly. Before I continue reading here, I want to add a little bit of color to that comment. Kevin Bruce, one of the legends of trend following, started out literally working in a gas station in Georgia, working the night shift at a gas station in Georgia. And with a calculator, simple input, get output, he developed his trend following approach. He calculated his signals via his rules through a simple calculator. The point being, don't get caught up in the mechanism. Don't get caught up in the format. It starts with the logic. What are you trying to do? Back to my guy, he's throwing out the term supercomputer because he's scared to death. He doesn't know how it works. But before he can even get to the idea of trend following, he has to understand what a computer does. And I'm lucky enough to have Dan Dennett to help us all. Back to Dan Dennett. Number 2, underlying mindlessness. Although the overall design of the procedure may be brilliant or yield brilliant results, each constituent step and the transition between steps is utterly simple. How simple? Simple enough for a dutiful idiot or for a straightforward mechanical device to perform. The standard textbook analogy notes that algorithms are recipes of sorts, designed to be followed by novice cooks. A recipe book written for great chefs might include the phrase, poach the fish in a suitable wine until almost done. But an algorithm for the same process might begin, choose a white wine that says dry on the label, take a corkscrew and open the bottle, pour an inch of wine in the bottom of the pan, turn the burner under the pan on high, ... a tedious breakdown of the process into dead simple steps, requiring no wise decisions or delicate judgments or intuitions on the part of the recipe reader. Can I beat my guy up again and his phrase supercomputer? I don't have to ring the bell very long for people to get how dumb it is to attribute trend following success to a quote computer. The ignorance in that I really don't have to beat up too much. I might like to beat it up too much, but you might get bored at me if I do that too much. Back to Dan Dennett, number 3. Guaranteed results. Whatever it is that an algorithm does, it always does it if it's executed without misstep. An algorithm is a foolproof recipe. It is easy to see how these features made the computer possible. Every computer program is an algorithm ultimately composed of simple steps that can be executed with stupendous reliability by one simple mechanism or another. Electronic circuits are the usual choice, but the power of computers owes nothing save speed to the casual peculiarities of electrons darting about on silicon chips. The very same algorithms can be performed even faster by devices shunting photons in glass fibers, or much, much slower by teams of people using paper and pencil. What Darwin discovered was not really one algorithm, but rather a very large class of related algorithms that he had no clear way to distinguish. Now, I want to go into a great example that Dennett gives in his book about automating the elevator. This is from Dan Dennett. Before leaving our interlude about computers, I want to introduce one more group of useful ideas about source code, comments, and object code, which have an important application in our quest to understand how meaning could reside in brains. It's often wise to study a dead simple example in some detail to get a secure grip on our concepts before tackling a mind buster. In the field of artificial intelligence, these are nicely known as toy problems. First, you solve the toy problem before tackling the gnarly, great real-world problem. So this is a story made up for simplicity's sake, but otherwise realistic, about how human elevator operators got replaced by computer chips. In my youth, there were elevator operators, people whose job was to go up and down in an elevator all day, stopping at the right floors to take on and let off passengers. In the early days, they manipulated a curious handle that could be swung clockwise or counterclockwise to make the elevator go up or down. And they needed skill to stop the elevator at just the right height. People often had to step up or down an inch or two upon entering and leaving, and operators always warned people about this. They had lots of rules about what to say, when, and which floors to go to first, and how to open the doors, and so forth. Let me offer a comment, and any of you in New York can correct me if I'm wrong. And this was probably, almost 10 years ago for me. I think it's the Flatiron Building. I went to visit a publisher there, I believe, in 2006 or 7. And I think they still had the guy in the elevator operating the elevator. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe he was just in the elevator pressing the button for you. I can't remember. But still, one of those things, this nonsense still exists. Now, in that case, it's probably just because it's kind of old and cool. Back to Dan Dennett. Their training consisted in memorizing the rules and then practicing following the rules until it became second nature. The rules themselves have been hammered out over the years in a design process that made a host of slight revisions and improvements. Let's suppose that this process had more or less settled down, leaving an ideal rulebook as its product. It worked wonderfully. Anybody who followed the rules exactly was an excellent elevator operator. Now imagine what happened when it became possible for a simple computer program to take over all of the control tasks of the operator. In fact, this happened gradually with various automatic mechanical devices being introduced to take the more skilled tasks away from the operator. But we'll imagine that elevators went from human operators to completely computer-controlled systems in one leap. The elevator's manufacturer, let's suppose, calls in a team of software engineers, programmers, and hands them the rule book that the human elevator operators have been following. Quote, "This is a specification of the performance we want. Make a computer program that follows all the rules in this book, as well as the best human operators, and we'll be satisfied." As the programmers go through the rulebook, they make a list of all the actions that have to be taken and the conditions under which they are prescribed or forbidden. In the process, they can clean up some of the untidiness in the rulebook. Okay, I got to go back and beat on the guy again with the supercomputer thing. Even if you had this supercomputer, and I'm assuming he just means speed, how in the world does speed help you in a trend following system if you're trading a daily chart or a weekly chart? How does the speed help you? In trend following, it's not about the quote supercomputer. It's about the organization. You're simply in a need to organize your thoughts, to organize your rules, to write down your procedures that you follow religiously. Why? Risk management. If you're going to be dealing with $30 billion or $100,000 and you're going to risk XYZ percent and you're going to trade these 20 markets or these 100 markets, you need to get super granular. This is about money, after all. You need to be able to keep track. I would make the case that the trend following superstar is more grounded in the nature of a CPA than he is in that of an artificial intelligence expert. Let me repeat that. Trend following trader equals CPA, not AI singularity theorist. That stuff is not real world. Real world is knowing how much money do you have, what are your bets, down to the minuscule amount, noting that decimal place at all times. That's what it's all about. That's what Dennett's getting at with the elevator comparison. Back to Dan Dennett. For instance, if they build in sensors to ensure that the elevator always stops at exactly the right level, they can eliminate the loop that requires the operator to say, please step up or please step down. But they might leave intact a simple recorded voice saying, nth floor, watch your step. Then they write out a sketch of the program in what is often called pseudocode, a sort of mongrel language that is halfway between everyday human language and the more demanding system of source code. A line of pseudocode might look something like this. If call floor is greater than current floor, then ascend until call floor equals current floor and stop. Open door, wait. This is like dumb stump shit, right? Trend following is about having all the brilliance to come up with a strategy, but the execution is dumb stump. Follow rules. Stick to rules. Be mechanical. There is nothing sexy here. The word super should not exist in the jargon of a trend following trader. Dennett continues, once the plan is clear in pseudocode and seems to be what is wanted, the pseudocode can be translated into source code, which is a much more rigorous and structured system of operations, including definitions of terms, variables, subroutines, and so forth. Human beings can still quite readily decipher source code. After all, they write it, and hence the rules and terms of the rulebook are still quite explicitly represented there, if you know how to look for them. This is made easier by two features. First, the names for the variables and operations are usually chosen to wear their intended meanings on their sleeves. Call floor, wait sum, tell floor, etc. Second, programmers can add comments to their source code, explanations that tell other human readers of the source code what the programmer had in mind and what the various parts are supposed to do. When you write a program, it is wise to add comments for yourself as you go, since you may easily forget what you thought the line of code was doing. When you go back to correct programming errors, these comments are very useful. Source code has to be very carefully composed according to a strict syntax, with every element in the right place and all the punctuation in the right order, since it has to be fed to a compiler program which takes the source code and translates it into the sequences of fundamental operations in the object code that the actual machine or virtual machine can execute. A compiler can't be asked to guess what a programmer means by a line of source code. The source code must tell the compiler exactly what operations to perform. But the compiler program may have lots of different ways of performing those tasks and will be able to figure out an efficient way under the circumstances. Some compilers are better than others. If you feed the same program written in source code into two different compilers, the object code that one compiler produces may run significantly faster than the other object code, for instance. Imagine you've written a chess program and you feed its source code to two different compilers. Then play the two compiled versions against each other on the same computer. Even though the two versions think all the same thoughts in the same order, they have exactly the same source code, one may always beat the other simply because it thinks those thoughts faster, using fewer basic machine cycles, and hence can look farther ahead during the time available. That is a fantastic point for trend following traders. Please tell me if you're trading a daily bar, a weekly bar, what does speed have to do with a trend following program? But it's a supercomputer! And I'm scared of supercomputers. And somebody that has a staff of 400 and they've got supercomputers to identify trades, I can't compete with that. No, you can't compete with that. You can't compete with a $30 billion hedge fund. But if you want to be a trend following trader, you aren't competing against a $30 billion hedge fund. The world is a lot bigger. The markets are a hell of a lot bigger than $30 billion. You just need to get your act in order. You just need to have your understanding of trend following, and you'll be fine. Trust me. And if you don't trust me, verify me. And there was another comment that this reader wrote me about. I know I sound a little unnerved. I'm not really unnerved, but I just hate the logical fallacies. Because he could have gone and figured this out himself, but instead he gave me a great topic for a podcast, so for that I thank him. But in all seriousness, do a little legwork. There is so much documentation you can read out there. Cliff Asness's firm, AQR, Larry Height's firm, ISIM, Jean-Philippe Bouchot, CFM out of Paris, David Harding's Winton Capital, hint, hint. All of these men pretty freely give the world their insights. They are telling you what they do. Now, whether you believe them or not, or whether or not you invent in your mind a supercomputer excuse, which then absolves you from having to do anything, well, that's on you. But it's amazing how much free education is out there from some of the most successful traders alive. They tell you how it is. Back to Dan Dennett and back to our elevator. Once the compiler has compiled the object code, it can be executed. It's an executable file and usually has the suffix .exe in its name by the virtual machine. It may need rounds of debugging, back to the source code, adjust it, then recompile, etc. But eventually it's a finished product. It can be burned into ROM on a tiny chip that contains a universal machine and any number of virtual machines on top of it, and installed in the elevator. Installing it involves hooking up the inputs from transducers, such as the signals from the buttons and from the scale on the floor that measures the combined weight of the passengers and from other parts, and hooking up the outputs to the effectors, running the motors that open and close the door and raise and lower the car, and updating the displays or playing the recordings. Ta-da! A machine has replaced one actual human being. I love that story from Dan Dennett. It's fantastic. He breaks it down as a good philosopher should. And Dan Dennett is more than a good philosopher. He's one of the best, a great. But to break down what is still for many people a complicated, esoteric, confusing world of software, hardware, this ain't easy for people to get. So I appreciate Dan Dennett coming on board today, helping me to let people see a different vantage on a subject that's often mysterious as hell. You don't want to be the guy that says no one knows. Oh, sure, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I can build a system to play tomorrow. I can build a system to play next week. I can have rules in place that dictate my actions no matter what happens. And to be able to do that is magic. Truly, it's magic. The magic that can offer peace of mind. And of course, while you have that peace of mind, you are also putting yourself in place to make some money. So you can think to yourself that no one knows what the $30 billion hedge fund manager does for his daily bread. You can think no one knows. You can convince yourself of that. You can not do your homework and you cannot know. But plenty of other people know. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.